Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a really fun video. So going into Dragonflight, I actually had a personal goal that I wanted to achieve, which was just that I wanted to, learn how to heal. I've played World of Warcraft for like a really long time, and honestly I've yet to do anything other than leveling a healer to max level. I've never actually pushed a healing to hard content or anything. And I thought that, Dragonflight was going to be the expansion where I actually pushed myself. And I want to showcase that little journey in this video. But with a challenge like this, trying a whole new role, the very first problem that we need to overcome is what healer are we going to play? We of course have 7 options. We have both the Discipline and the Holy Priest. We have the Restoration Druid, the Restoration Shaman, the Holy Paladin, the Mistweaver Monk, and of course the Preservation Evoker. Now, picking whatever the right healer was actually turned out to be a really difficult thing to do, because honestly I didn't know what the right questions were to ask, simply because of a lack of experience. When it comes to DPSers or just tanks in general, I know what I like about them. I know what it means that I see it cooldown reduction, builds, and I burst, but not too bursty. I don't want to rely too much on it, but what did that actually mean in healer context? What is a healer's burst, right? Of course it's that they heal very much, but what's the opposite of that, right? It's that I wasn't quite sure what I was kind of looking for. So when I went into finding the right healer for me, I honestly went by that little experience that I already have, and then I guess we'll just further on doing maybe a next episode or something like that, go a little bit more exploring what do I like about the spec or the class that I have chosen. But with experience, unfortunately, that means I had just to rule out Holy Paladin and Mistweaver Monk. I've never actually really played Holy Paladin. I've leveled 1 to 40, maybe? 30, maybe not even. But at least not max level or anything. And Mistweaver Monk, the last time I played that was in Legion. So, I just have to rule them out. But that leaves us with 4 other potential healers. The first healer I was considering was the Priest, and more specifically the Holy Priest. So the reason why I was thinking about playing the Holy Priest was simply just because of that the Holy Priest is kind of the stereotypical healer, right? When you're picturing yourself a healer, you are properly imagining the Holy Priest. Just the same way as, the Protection Warrior is kind of the big beefy guy with a shield is what you think of when you think of a tank. And with that logic and my small experience with Holy Priest, I kind of just, it kind of also just feels almost like a jack of all trades kind of healer. It has everything that you kind of expect there to be and you want there to be. It doesn't really feel like there's any situations where, the Holy Priest is gonna any specific encounters where they're really gonna suffer. But really if you want to talk meta-wise, if it really suffers with the Holy Priest, typically why you don't see them in play, or when you don't see them in play, it's simply just down to numbers. Not really their kit or, their way to heal or anything like that. And of course, Priest does have two specs, which is really cool because if I actually got tired of one spec, you can always switch over to another one, which is variation is always a plus. Unfortunately, and this is probably a really hot take, on controversial one, is no hate to Discipline at all. It's just for I guess for right now I want to feel the typical healer experience. I don't really want to play this hybrid between DPS and healer. It's not so much about the fun aspect, because I can definitely see that the Discipline can be fun. It's more I don't know if it's the fantasy aspect of it, maybe. I tried it before and I just got stuck with the feeling of I honestly rather wanted to just DPS or just to heal. I don't want to kind of do the mix of them. So for that reason, the Discipline was kind of out. And the reason why I didn't choose the Holy Priest is actually just boils down to utility. And here's again, not that Priest doesn't have really great utility. I was just simply looking at the other healers and what they brought to the table, and just thought that what they brought was more desirable. One of the like great things about Priest that I'm really gonna like miss out on is gonna be Mass Dispel. That can't be like under-exaggerated, like how powerful that could be. Right now this season not so much, but you just saw like last season it was like mandatory. They're like, that kind of has have a huge effect of like the priest is like the worth of the priest utility, and I honestly just felt like I could get better value somewhere else. So no hate to the priest, but unfortunately they out. The next one I actually had on my list was Preservation Evoker. I don't know, it kind of surprised me that I actually liked it so much as I did. So my experience with Preservation Evoker is simply just that I played a little bit of it when it first came out. I think I tried, maybe a Mythic 0 or something like that with it. And I remember it being quite fun, and it honestly felt like Blizzard had in mind of like, making a healer for people who didn't necessarily like healing. It was kind of fast, it was kind of like, really interactive with like its, the breaths and like, all your charge up abilities and all that kind of cool stuff. This like really interactive gameplay with also just it being really flashy, it just does something to my brain that I like really like. Like it is just plain out fun to play Evoker. And unfortunately, it's not that I don't like Preservation Evoker, because I almost chose it, but I also just have to be honest that like it is my least favorite spec of all of the Evoker specs, meaning that if I actually went and chose it, yeah, I would have a blast with it, but eventually I kind of just would be stuck with the feeling of, wow, I would honestly rather play Devastation or just Augmentation. And all it kind of comes down to is your main use of Echo, or like your use of Echo, which is like one of your main abilities, and like what it basically does, it duplicates your healing spell on the target, meaning that they get like 110% extra healing from you. And I can't deny that like it feels really good when when everything just works out and you just you land a Verdant Embrace and you have your Echo up and you just like it brings the tank from like 20 or 30% all the way up to almost like full health. And you're like swimming in Essence Burst, so it's not like you're waiting too long and like to use these Echoes. You can almost like have them up at like all the parties as like all of your teammates and everything. It's just that I just can't really knock the feeling. It just feels like a extra button to press for no reason. And I always like kind of hated that with Warcraft, with like some of its like designs and stuff like that. But sometimes it's just I want to like use this ability because like I see my teammate is like low on health, or like they're dying, or like whatever. I want to use this ability, but before I do that, I need to like take step B or like something like that. I don't know, it just always put me off a little bit from it, which is a really shame because honestly I like everything else about the Preservation Evoker, and it is a really fun spec to like ult into and play out, and I'm definitely gonna like play more of it. I just to main it, or like to like really focus in as I want to do with like this little like experiment or what do you want to call it, I don't think Evoker is gonna be the one for me. Now my like second place pick here was going to be the Druid, and I honestly, Druid is probably the healer I have the most experience with, and probably is the healer I'm like all around the most like my favorite one, and it all basically comes down to its way of healing, right? So the interesting thing about Druid is that it's all about the HUDs, or like healing over time. I have always, I don't know for why, I just always loved this kind of playstyle. It is also kind of means that it is, I think it's not really controversial, please healer mains out there, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of accepted that like Restoration healer is usually the hardest healer, or like at least that it requires the most like game knowledge, because you can't really like keep up in high keys if you're just like reactive all the time, right? You need to actually be preactive, right? You need to react before something happens. You need to build up your HUDs in order for people to survive. Since you're lacking of direct heals, you have some of course, but like nothing close to what other healers have. What intrigues me about this like playstyle is that if you have like become really good at like restoration druid, basically like your team is not gonna really experience like losing health because you're just always gonna keep healing on them all the time, right? Like every single time raid damage is gonna come in, they're getting instantly healed up again. But that also means that this healer is going to be the more like punishing out of all these forwards that I picked, because I can't really speak for the Holy Paladin or Mistweaver. But let me know if I missed out on those two as well. No, but it's going to be the most punishing because if you fall behind, there's not really much you can do. Or at least it's going to be extremely difficult to catch up, like compared to all the other healers. And one thing I actually haven't mentioned about the other healers, but I think is like really relevant here is, you know, it's not all about healing, you know, you have other things as well. And one thing I really like about the druid, it makes sense to me, is its damage rotation, right? It's way to do damage, because that's also a healer's job. But here we have Moonfire and Sunfire, which just works as well as like, you know, healing like most of your damage with your dots. Meaning a lot of them is kind of just a put it and forget it, which means that you can go back to focus on whatever you want, and if you can just do more damage, you can just spam Wrath or Staff or like whatever, like, you know, if you want AoE or single target. As well, of course, the huge talent that, like, you know, transfer all your healing over to damage to nearby targets, which is also a really fun way to just burst out damage. So I really like the druid is like probably my favorite healer. I like the healing of it, like the type of healing it does. I like its damage waves. It also has great CC. And the whole difficulty aspect is actually generally really intriguing because, yeah, it's gonna be very punishing, but if I succeed, it's gonna be so ever like satisfying, right? And also just what a great way to learn the game, just to throw you off in the deepest way. But honestly, the reason I didn't choose the druid, and the reason for it basically just always comes down to two aspects, and one of them is basically just utility. And, you know, you probably guessed already now by like what healer is left, which healer I picked. And of course I did end up like choosing the shaman. So let's get the utility out of the way, because of course the druid has amazing utility. But what I was specifically thinking about was the question between having Bloodlust or having a Battle Res. Both of them are extremely, like, you know, useful and have a huge amount of like worth in Mythic Plus. And it basically just comes down to a personal preference that I would rather have Bloodlust than to have a Battle Res. So, and I really, as I mentioned before, on the Evoker, I really value having Bloodlust. And it's such a huge benefit just to have it for yourself, so you can choose like when you want to do it. Not to be like an asshole or anything, you know, if I have a tank or someone who wants a specific point, of course I'm gonna listen to him. But like 99% of the time, no one says a thing. So it's better just to like throw it off and just do it rather than like, you know, having to rely on someone else doing it, because it's a huge body buff. It's huge. The other aspect that really made me choose Restoration Shaman is simply just because it really feels like kind of the same way as Holy Priest. A little bit less of the stereotypical healer, but it really just feels like the jack of all trades of the healers. It kind of feels like the old Demon Hunter, where you can kind of do everything else that the healers can do, just not as good or as great. Which really kind of sounds bad, but honestly it's a really like plus in my opinion, because it really just puts me in a position where I'm gonna be able to perform in any single like specific encounter. I'm not gonna be like left out. I'm not gonna be standing in an awkward position just because I'm playing a different class, or like just because I'm playing Shaman. And then of course you just have an amazing array of like, you know, utility with like Tremor Totem, you have a Stun Totem, you have Hex, you have... It just honestly feels like a class that has everything that you would want. And hey, like dropping a Healing Totem is fucking cool, right? I mean, I don't know why, it's just really cool in my head. Now, I definitely could regret my decision later on, and especially when I actually try and push up into higher content. But for now, honestly, it felt really good with the Shaman, and it honestly still feels really good. But as I told you before, I will definitely let you know how my experience or my thoughts and opinions might change going higher and higher in the content. But as you can see in the background here, we are pushing into Mythic Plus, and you know, I'm doing a +5 here, and I've done +2s before, but honestly, let's talk a little bit about like, you know, my first impressions and also just a little bit about my expectations. First of all, my first expectation was that these lower keys were gonna be 50-50. Because I had this like expectation that this is something I've heard from other healer friends and just people in general in the community, is that the difficulty of healing really relies on your team. If you have a team that just does not press defensive cooldowns and just walks into everything, you will have a really stressful time. But if you're going into a dungeon where you have like people who just like are carrying you or just pushing you through or whatever, you know, just really high geared, you don't really have to do anything and you just basically a glorified like DPSer, right? And my expectation was like kind of somewhat right and somehow wrong. And so first of all, that whole general idea I think still holds true, and is something really I'm gonna experience when I pushed higher. Like, you know, right now I'm pushing into the 11s and 14s, and this is actually where it began to show where, like, you know, people would actually take damage, because in the lower keys it was not 50-50. It was basically 90-10 that people would just smash right through. I actually just kind of just saw that this might just be a this season specific thing, but there's basically not really much damage going on in these mythic keys on like anything below an 8. It's honestly kind of difficult to die if you're not just actively standing in fire, which again, those kind of situations are kind of rare in this season, like in this middle. But yeah, let's talk about this like glorified DPSer thing, because that is also really, really true. Something that kind of surprised me, like how big it is, because I knew that the healers were supposed to do damage. Like that whole, it's not even a discussion at that point. Like if you're not doing damage, if you're just standing still and doing nothing, it's always better to do damage. But honestly, it actually goes further than that, really. Like, you are more just of a support role, and that actually really came true with, all my utility and stuff like that. I was trying to really get on point with, I want to, like, it's better for me to spend a global on using my, like, AoE stun than it is for someone else, because that could be potentially a little bit of damage. And I kind of viewed that of, like, me being more, have more liberty with my like global cooldowns in form of like trying to support my team would be better, like overall. I kind of saw it as me like adding to like the damage, and I don't mean that like in an arrogant way or whatsoever. I just more mean it of you're not really a glorified DPSer, you're just more, you fill whatever role the group needs in that specific moment, right? If they need a healer, you're there, you're pumping, you're full on like going ham, right? But if they don't, then you need to be whatever like they need. If they are lacking in kicks and CC, that's where you kind of like need to step up a little bit, right? As much as you of course can. And then of course, like if they just, everything is going swell, then like uses a fourth DPSer who just does a little bit less DPS. But one thing I think is like kind of a thing every healer probably has to go through is that it's kind of difficult sometimes to figure out if it's your fault or not. Like, what is the what is this respectful reaction time that you need to have? Like, if a person dies within 3 seconds, like from full health, and then 3 seconds goes by and they die, is that your fault? Like, and it's like, of course, I'm asking a question, like, you need to look at the specific cases and stuff like that. But you saw earlier here that the tank died before we went on Mochi for the first time. And I was thinking to myself, because in the game right there, I remember this dungeon, this run right here, I remember just, he died so fast that I couldn't react, but then looking back at the footage now, I was like, oh, it's actually like 4 seconds went by. And of course, if someone gets one-shotted, of course, like, there's nothing you can do about it. Like, we're talking, if someone dies within like 1 second or something like that, like 2 seconds, 2 hits, 3 hits, whatever, it's kind of difficult to heal that back up. But it's something I'm trying to be aware of. It's like, when is it actually, like, when could I have done something and when is it someone else's? Because I always, there are times where people would die with defensive cooldowns up, and I'm like, you could have pressed it and you would survive, but then again, I could also just have healed better, absolutely, right? Because I'm not really that efficient right now. So that's something I'm like looking really like I'm looking into, trying to figure out more of what is realistically that I can do and what is what can't I do, what is like, you know, on the other people. What I found most interesting about healers was basically just learning the game from a whole other perspective. You know, if something will feel familiar, such as, you know, both you and the tank are using some kind of like defensive cooldowns, like big healing cooldowns that like, you know, take care of people, but you have a like defensive perspective on it, meaning that you're looking to use it roughly on around the same times in the most dangerous packs, whereas the DPS are, you know, more using their cooldowns to get the most out of their DPS, right, their damage. But what then has been really difficult, especially coming from a tank perspective here, as a tank main, is the fact that when you're playing a tank, your route is just basically set in stone. It's almost always the same route you always run. It's going to be the same pack, pull by pull. Maybe somebody body pulls something a little bit extra, but usually you're used to that and whatever. Like, it's almost the same pack. With a healer, it's not. You're playing with a different tank almost every time. It's like basically almost every time if you're pucking, and meaning that your gameplay and like cooldown usage becomes very reactionary, and it has to be reactionary, meaning that like you have to pre-plan it a lot, but also just like you need to also just be able to instantly use it if the tank decides to do something that you've just never seen before. So having that reactionary like aspect into the gameplay is honestly kind of fun and thrilling, but also I can see it being kind of frustrating in the future as well. Little side note here to the gameplay you're seeing in the background. So, you know, again, as a tank main, I've never really had to deal with these orbs before. So this is also me going into this really big of like you know, the support role. Like, you just fill out any thing that your group needs. So when people are asking, you know, hey, who's doing orbs, I'm the first one to say like, oh, I'm going to do it, even though I'm terrible. I'm better at it now, guys. Don't flame me too much in the comments. I'm better at it now, but it's something, you know, you have to do. You just have to jump into it to learn it. One thing that I've been thinking about since going into this and pushing a little bit harder content is it's a little bit about like how much influence you have as a healer. Because I've heard, you know, from Preach's old healer videos that I watched back then, he said a lot about like, you know, the healer is the one with the least amount of influence. And while compared to a tank who has like the most amount of influence and something that you really can feel in the dungeons, right? Like, I mean in Mythic Plus, like you decide, you know, the whole route, you decide what to pull, you decide everything, right? And if you have a really bad team, you have someone who's struggling a lot, you know, obviously, you know, change your route like so it more appeases like their level, right? And since you're not really planning the route as a healer, you kind of limited on that like influence. But also just it kind of was shown to me that, you know, with the groups that are a little bit worse, so just, you know, taking a lot more damage, that I can bandage the wound very effectively, actually. Like, I can make up for like some pretty big mistakes. But there are going to be a point where I just simply you know, I'm out of resources. I just can't do anything more. Like, I'm pushed to my limit of like how much influence I have. Also, on here you can see my my little dragon riding icons got stuck. Don't dragon ride and get TP, guys. Don't try that. It feels like, but like going back to the whole influence thing, it feels like I'm doing a lot when I see all the numbers, the health bars going down, and I use my cooldowns or whatever at the right times. I'm not here. I'm not talking about specific points like boss damage. I'm talking about when someone does a little bit of mistake, the tank accidentally pulls way too much that he's comfortable with, like, you know, or like, yeah, or just something happens, you know, I use my cooldowns where I might not have wanted to do it, but like that right there, I feel like, oh, I saved the whole group. If it wasn't for me, if I didn't, you know, do this, then it wouldn't have gone through. And it's kind of like, you know, showing me that there are a lot of like small hidden victories that the healer does throughout the dungeon that people just kind of not really pay attention to, because you usually just pay attention to the healer when you die or if you're like really close to dying. So I'm not really sure if you have like how much influence you have, because like directly it doesn't really feel like it, but you have so many small like hidden things that you do that like really can benefit the group. The last two things I want to mention is the how much you have to dispel is really like interesting to me. So dispel is of course something I was aware of, like don't get me wrong, I know it, but like to an extent of like how much you actually have to dispel. So I have never called a healer out for something I thought could be dispelled, and it turns out that like 90% of the time I was right, that you could definitely have dispelled it, like something like a stun or a silence or just a really nasty dot or like whatever. Just a regular dispel could have like solved that, but I never called a healer out for it because I was so scared of like how stupid I would look if I just called the healer an idiot, and turns out they couldn't have done anything to it and I should just have been better at dodging it or like, you know, whatever. But like playing a healer now, and actually seeing these dispels, because I've seen them, you know, when I was just doing like leveling dungeons and like whatever, but like at that point, and also just lower Mythic Plus, like really low, they don't really do anything like damage wise and stuff like that. So honestly, you can completely just ignore it, and I don't blame you for ignoring it. But pushing up higher and higher, you definitely see it if you're not really quick on dispelling, and it was kind of interesting in the playing of it. Like it's about speed, it's about how fast you can react, and that's sort of just in general the healer here, which I'm a little bit surprised about. I thought it was more about, I thought it had a bigger impact on like planning and head and stuff like that, and that's definitely a huge factor. But that's honestly more true with the tank than it is with the healer. The healer is just more reactionary. And the last aspect is just the biggest surprise to me. I love that mana is a resource. It might be one of the more, like the most fun aspect of playing a healer, in my opinion. It sounds bizarre, but I love when we're using mana. I love that our healings are not just, like we can just have like endless resources for it or whatever. This whole like putting mana on it and actually making mana mean something is really putting a huge emphasis on like using the right spells sorry, using the right spells at the right time and not overusing it, right? And looking at the how the dungeon is going and like the route that the tank is going, like figuring out these small pockets of like out of combat where you can like, you know, drink up just a tiny bit, because you're not gonna sit there for very long, right? Because you need to move on like further on. And also like you need to place yourself ahead of the group and the team and everything. That this whole like strategizing just around getting your resource back, I love it. Like it's so fun. It feels like a riddle that you just, or like a puzzle that you're just doing over and over again, and it's always satisfying for some reason, because you just, you know, when it's going well, right? And also just on the other side of it, when you are just, you know, having a tank that's really pushing you, or you just like, you have a group where you just need to pump out so much healing, being on the other side of it when like, you know, your mana is getting low is honestly kind of like the adrenaline there, right? You really have to plan out, right? Because that's where also you come into this whole question of like, you know, having to like save someone. Like, I mean, like actually select who you want to save, because you don't have resources enough to heal everyone. So all of a sudden it becomes a question of like, okay, who's doing the most damage here? Or like, who is going to do the most damage, which is even more interesting, right? Like, do you have a class that's more bursty but just used its burst? I guess, you know, you just have to let him or her die, right? Because, you know, you have a Frost Mage that's just like, it's constantly just going to keep going. Just all out just of like just mana being a resource is incredible. So that has been for me like the first couple of things that like I've noticed as just jumping in as a healer. I really hope you guys like, you know, enjoyed this little experiment that I'm trying to do. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video, and you know, see you in the next season where I might be a healer main.